We went to Amsterdam to interview Ives, co-founder of CodeSandbox. It's an online kind of environment, online development IDE in the browser. He told us how he raised 2.4 million at his age and in Europe, which is pretty impressive. I tried not to ask questions, which he already answered in these two other videos. One is an interview, a very short one, and another one is a talk he did. So check those out to have like the full picture. In this case, I wanted to really understand the practical stuff, how he went from kind of zero, from nothing, from no product, to raising 2.4 million. And yeah, which steps did he make? Yeah, but it's interesting that you are like open source project.
Yeah.
And this is something a few years ago I was in this event. And like there was one even talk about like, yeah, how do you make money with open source? And some fields, yeah, it's even impossible. As soon as it's like not for other developers that they can't contribute, it's pretty much impossible. But yeah, did you have it in mind when you started it, like to make it open source, or it just natural transition?
Yeah, initially we weren't open source. So initially
you weren't?
No. So for the first 2 months that we released, we weren't open source. And we decided after 2 months to open source it because there was such a good response from developers. So we thought, okay, people might be able to help with the project itself. And we also didn't think we would be able to really make money with CodeSandbox. We talked to companies within Enschede, and all the companies that we talked to were small size. And they didn't see that much benefit in using CodeSandbox, while CodeSandbox is more beneficial for big size companies, but we didn't ask them at the time.
Can you stop about that? Because so when you started in 2017, you released it, right? In the mid 2017. So straight away, you and Bas already, you were just approaching companies.
To see if there's an actual business model behind it.
Was it something that Novelty taught you, or like?
No, it was not what Novelty. So we did talk to some companies through Novelty. There was this UT challenge that we did, and so we talked with some companies from Enschede using that. But it was mostly ourselves. We just wanted to know if companies would find this useful, because then we could have a potential business model. But we didn't think it would be useful. Only later, when CodeSandbox became more popular, there were companies who sent emails that they wanted to have an on-premise version of CodeSandbox within their infrastructure. And then we found out, oh, actually big-scale companies find this interesting. Okay.
At which stage was it? Because in your story, during your studies, you coded for many months, you released it. Then you mentioned how you tweeted, and like some people, there basically some traction started coming. People from Reddit started like commenting. And like at which stage, yeah, you wanted, okay, let's actually make like business out of it.
Well, we thought already from the start that it would be possible to make a startup out of this. We just weren't sure how possible. I just wanted to release the project just because I wanted to share it with everyone, and I wanted so that everyone could use it. And then the second question was whether it could be a startup. And we thought that it would be able to become a startup, so we went open source. But in hindsight, even if we wanted to make it a startup, it would still be possible to make it open source, because open source, nowadays, there are lots of open source companies with a good business model where the core of the company, the tool that they kind of sell, well, the tool that they use is open source. But then the service they build around that tool. So for example, let's say WordPress is a good example. WordPress itself is an open source framework for building blogs. But then they also have a service, WordPress.com, I think, which hosts that blog. So they have the perfect service for hosting WordPress blogs. And they make a lot of money. They are a multi-billion company. And same for other services like Elastic. Elastic is a Dutch company. Well,
Elasticsearch, you mean?
Yeah, it has Dutch founders. And one of their products is Elasticsearch. Well, Elasticsearch is open source. But then they have services to host these open source projects. And that's just one model. Our kind of model is that the front end of CodeSandbox is open source, but the actual server with all the collaboration aspects, like like the live editing, the Teams functionality, that's closed source, and that's what we sell.
The companies.
Right.
Okay, because you mentioned on-premise.
Yeah, although we don't have on-premise version yet. That's something that we want to postpone until later, because we expect that there will be a lot of support and maintenance as soon as we start offering enterprise on-premise versions.
Okay, but then like I'm a bit confused then, because one thing I constantly was asking myself, how such project makes money. I looked a bit like patrons. I don't know how much people donate. It's hard to estimate. I don't know if there is anything, but besides that, it was hard to find anything else. How do you make money?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good observation. It's we don't have a real proven business model right now. So that's the thing that we also told our investors, that with the initial funding, we want to start validating business models. And the business model that we're going for right now is Team Pro. So you can already create teams, but we want to make it possible so that you can have like teams within companies, which is Team Pro. You get this extra functionality for your team with private projects. You can have integration with your local infrastructure, and then you pay per user per month of the team. So for example, if your team has 5 users, 5 members, then you would pay $50 a month for having that team as a pro team. And that is the model that we expect to release somewhere in February. And then we're gonna see how many companies latch on to this, how many companies actually benefit from this, and see if this is the way to make money with the service.
Okay. And which stage did you, because I also read that you were in this Novelties Top program.
Yeah.
In which stage did you go there? So 2017, you release it together with Bas already, right?
Yeah.
And after what time do you?
Yeah, pretty late actually. I think so. A year ago, somewhere in November, we started talking with them about the top program.
2017 November.
2018 November.
18.
Yeah.
So like just a year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. Because we were sure that we wanted to raise money from investors, and we were sure that we would be able to raise money from investors, but we wanted to move fast. And the worst time to raise money from investors is around Christmas, because it's just hard to make a deal around Christmas.
Why?
So, well, because then one investor is on holiday, and then the other, and then you have holidays as well, and it's just hard to set up meetings. So, and also for some investors, they raise funds yearly, and then December is like at the end of their funds. So they raise new funds in January. So we decided that we already wanted to grow, we already wanted to hire people, but we weren't able to get investments until January. So if we would be able to join the top program, we could get 40,000 euros. Mm-hmm. So we would already be able to start hiring people in November already. So that was why we wanted to join the top program, aside from the advice that we would get from Novelty. We wanted to join the program just so that we have a buffer. And in January, we would raise like a real round and then pay back the 40K.
Were you already earning something in that moment?
Yeah.
Like from patrons, I assume.
Yeah, I think we were on 6,000 euros a month or something.
Not bad.
At that time. It was enough to sustain Bas and me.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Yeah, but it's interesting that indeed that people are donating for that. That's really nice. And then, so, because the amount for me, like, is it 2.4 million, right?
Yeah.
I really am not that deep into all the investments, but only comparison I know is, for example, because it's a seed funding, right? Is Y Combinator, which gives in US 150K. Yeah. It's so far away from like, so like how did you get it? I don't know. Is it even worth speaking about things like multipliers of your worth? Like, I assume it's quite high.
Yeah, it's interesting because so seed rounds they are kind of like the Wild West. They can be any kind of amount. I even know a company who raised 30 million for a seed round. Y Combinator has an interesting approach because they tell you that the most value that they have, and I agree with them, is their advice and their network. So they only buy a small portion of your company for not a lot of money, but you can join their program, and they are very intensively helping you by, you have to fly over, you have to stay there, and you have multiple meetings a week with them, and they follow your progress. So they have a lot of coaching. It's really more like, I think, a boot camp. I didn't do a Y Combinator seed round, but that's how I've always perceived it.
Would you say small portion? Well, I think it's 8 or 10%, something like that. Or even,
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's relatively small.
Yeah, relatively small portion. And then you get 150K, kind of, I think, to get a start. Yeah. But the real value that you get from these sessions is their advice. And lots of companies, they pivot even during that phase. And that's so interesting about Y Combinator, because it works so well if you look at how many companies succeeded by Y Combinator, with Y Combinator. Then you also have traditional VCs, VCs who invest money on how much they think you're worth. We raised 2.4 million on 10 million posts, so that's sold 24%. The VC was leading the round with 2 million, and then we had 400K from other founders who were interested in investing and advising as well. The way that we got the investment is when we started, we already were known by developers, and there are quite some developer tool companies, so they reached out to us. So we know quite some developer tool companies, and
JetBrains.
We don't know JetBrains actually, but companies like Framer, who is here in Amsterdam as well, and Prisma, Gatsby, those kind of companies, Netlify as well. And we reached out to them asking, could you intro us to investors? And
so you reach out to them? Because before you said they reach out to you.
The investors didn't reach out to us. So initially...
No, these companies.
Yeah, they reached out to us to just meet us. And then at some point, we asked them to intro us to investors. And that's how it went. When we got one call with the investor, other investors started to see that, because investors talk to each other and the rumor gets out, and then other investors, they want to plan a meeting as well. So we went to San Francisco 2 times to do pitching. And at the end, we got an investment from Kleiner Perkins, which is a very good VC. They're quite known, and they have a long history. They are one of the first VCs around. So that's very nice.
Yeah, so you went to US actually, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because many companies I speak to in the Netherlands, well, I assume it's kind of all over Europe. I'm yet to find somebody who was like, my experience with investors was great. In Netherlands, I just have, like, I guess in Europe, I have never heard that. Like,
it's interesting. Yeah, when I think of investors from the US compared to Europe, I feel like investors in Europe are a bit more safe. Yeah. They like to see a revenue, proven business model. So we did talk with investors from the EU, and there were quite some investors also interested in investing in us from the EU, but we also had some kind of rejections from EU VCs because they wanted to see more revenue, while in the United States we didn't have any rejections. So that's pretty interesting how US works differently compared to Europe. And if you go to the Netherlands, the Netherlands, they are even more, I don't know how you'd call it, they're a bit more sober. They really want to see a business model and see a clear, proven, and the amounts that they invest are often lower than the amounts that you would see from an American VC. Yeah. We did raise funds from an angel fund, which is Arches Capital, and that's kind of the syndicate of a lot of angel investors in the Netherlands, and they all pitch in money. So we have quite some angel investors from the Netherlands. But I think what it mainly comes down to when searching for investment is that you need to do a lot of handshaking, and you need to have a lot of warm intros with people.
Looking back, what would you say, like, I did this correct, I did this right, this is what led to where I am now, for example, that you posted early on Reddit, Twitter, things like that?
Yeah, so the thing that worked best for me was to do a lot of talking to people. but actively reaching out. So initially, when CodeSandbox wasn't really big, I just looked in the user table and sent emails to people asking what they thought of CodeSandbox. And there were some interesting conversations. And that really helped because I saw what people were struggling with. I saw where we could add the most value. And it is super manual because you can't have a conversation with 1,000 people at the same time. But it did make it so the product itself would be better. That was very valuable. Then the other thing is reaching out to people with big follow base. That was really useful as well.
From the developer community?
Yeah, because they started to talk about it more and more, which kind of influenced other developers, and they started to talk about it.
What did you write them?
For one instance, there was a developer who just released a new library. And then I asked him if he would be interested in using CodeSandbox for the examples. And then he told me I would like to do that. However, I would like to see this feature implemented. So implemented that feature, and then he started to use CodeSandbox. And so it's kind of that's how it went. The other thing is that speaking at conferences was super valuable. I think that helps a lot with the developer community. But this is still very manual, but you get more, you still get a lot of feedback, and you talk to more people. So after the talk, people will probably come up to you to ask questions or to discuss things that they've noticed. And this is a really good way of getting feedback, but also making people enthusiastic about the story behind it, or to really make them enthusiastic about you as one of the creators. So that worked really well as well.
So these two things, conferences and reaching out to developers, the main things.
Yeah, very manual both, but there's this concept of 1,000 fans that I really like, that's better to have 1,000 fans than 10,000 people who like you, because the fans will buy anything from you, but also they will talk to other people about what you have. And that is far more effective than 10,000 people who like you.
Where do you get these concepts from? You read books or meet people?
Yeah, books. And initially I've read some books. I'm not sure where I got the 1,000 fans concept from, but there was this other book. It was something with 21 rules of marketing or something that I found very interesting. It was a very old book, but it still applies. That was pretty cool too. But yeah, when reading books or blog posts by people, they're also talking about the best way is to reach out. The lean startup is also an interesting...
Yeah, because you have very lean strategy. What you started is you wanted pretty much to help the code runs on on the web, because you had an issue at your work, right, with the coworkers, and it ended up as kind of IDE now.
Yeah. It's funny how it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you see yourself? Do you see do you have a competition? Do you see things like JetBrains, REPL as a competition, or you see that you are very unique in the market?
No, the market has been saturated quite a bit the last few years. When CodeSandbox came out, there was nothing really like it. But now some tools have popped up. So now it's kind of and you can also see that there's more buzz around online code editors. So really it's been becoming more saturated, and there are now more players in the field, which kind of keeps us on our toes. But yeah, it's becoming more competitive, which is cool. It's one way to make it work is to really define what you like to focus on, and everyone does this. They say, I want to focus on this part of the process. I want to focus on this part of the process. I want to focus on this goal, and that's the best way. I think if you can make one experience really good and focus on that experience, then that's the way to outdo competition.
You're really specialized.
Right.
Another source of revenue is sponsors on the GitHub page on the bottom.
Yeah.
The big companies Does it also was that from the very beginning? You reach out to them?
No, they reached out to us. That was pretty interesting. At the start, when we were just a side project, you could be a patron, or as a company, you could donate. And initially, we only had patron, and then companies asked us. They said, "Well, we use CodeSandbox a lot for these kind of things. We want a way to give money," and we didn't have a way. So that's when we set up the sponsorship part, where companies can sponsor CodeSandbox. And we used Open Collective for it. It was very easy to set up. So that's what we just started using. And it's pretty interesting how many companies have now started donating without us asking, just to kind of give back. However, we're thinking of stopping with the sponsorships, just to become a bit more, have a more professional look. Because we are kind of trying to get rid of the side project look that we have right now and give a more company look. So you can see that our homepage will get a redesign, and we will get rid of the patron name, but we'll call it Pro. We'll have a pricing page, all those kind of things.
Now looking, before I ask like what you did right, but what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a good one. One thing that's, well, I'm not sure if it's a bad thing, but the server, I wanted to use CodeSandbox as a learning project, to learn a new language specifically called Elixir. And now our backend is written in Elixir, and that's very cool. It's a good language. However, we are an editor focused for JavaScript developers, so we haven't been able to find someone else who knows Elixir yet to work at CodeSandbox, which is an interesting side effect.
So if you're an Elixir developer,
exactly, then you can reach out to us, because Elixir developers is something that we do need.
Because on the website I looked, you were looking only for one position, infrastructure and
backends.
Yeah, and you didn't mention Elixir there.
Yeah, only in the description, but I've been meaning to set up like a specific Elixir post just to get more Elixir. It's also, we haven't done enough to find Elixir developers yet. We haven't posted anything on Elixir job boards, for example, but it was far easier when hiring JavaScript developers. Yeah. This also brings kind of the other part of the concept, where one mistake that I think we've made, which we didn't get burned from it, but it would have been possible, is that you shouldn't hire too fast. We hired suddenly in like 2-3 months, we've hired 7 people. And for such a small team, that's a bit too fast, because the company culture needs to grow with it as well. And hiring a lot takes a lot of time, which is another mistake. When you're a project that's already quite popular among developers, opening a job post, well, I think for any startup, hiring is probably something that you don't want to do inbound if you don't have the resources to do all the job interviews. So what I mean with this is, it's probably not smart to open up a job application so that people can apply to it, because this is very intensive. You need to review everyone. When we opened up our job application for JavaScript developer, we got 300 applications, and it just took too much time to give everyone the same amount of time when reviewing the applications.
But don't you think very often pretty much every company needs to have this job application, because it indicates, oh, we are growing. So if you don't have on your page, like, it's good luck finding a company which doesn't have job postings. Like, I think it's impossible to find one in IT.
That's interesting, because I think when you're a really small company, like 2 people, 3 people, then outbound hiring, just approaching people, the best people you know, and asking them to work for you, I think it's more effective time-wise, and the people who come work for you, because most the really talented people, they will often not come to you. You have to go to them to ask whether they want to work for you. And I asked some other startups from our investor pool and how they've hired at the start, and they said that the first like 8 people they've hired were all outbound, like all asking for whether they would be interested in working for their vision. And nowadays I would do the same thing. If I would start a new company, then I would look at everyone I know and pick out the most talented people and just ask them whether they'd be interested, because that's how you get really talented people on your team. And right now, this worked out really well for us, what we've done in the end, because the people that we've hired are very motivated, and actually still everyone we've hired now is outbound. So we did get a lot of inbound applications, but we didn't use any of those. The people we've hired were outbound, which goes to say how big of a time sink it was just to review every application and go through the job.
And it shows how important is networking.
Right, networking is extremely important.
Well, you started coding it yourself, and then now you're really moving away from coding and into doing the documents.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, do you like it? How hard is it?
Yeah, it's something that I still have to learn. It's as people started joining CodeSandbox, as more people joined CodeSandbox, I was able to do less coding because I was more doing pair programming, showing other people the code base, how it worked, automating things that I normally did on my own, documenting things. But also, aside from that, on the code side, there was also project management, one-on-ones with people to ask how they think that it's going, doing this whole management system setup that Bas has been doing mostly now. There is a lot more to it suddenly when other people join. There are so many different meetings, you have to make sure that everyone's working fine. And initially it was tiring for me because coding was something that gave me energy. I already knew how it worked, and meetings were completely new. It was suddenly from code problems you went to people problems. And it was something I was not very familiar with, setting up like doing one-on-ones. Even job interviews were also quite tiring. But now that I've really learned how, I've done it more and more, and I've slowly started to learn more how it works. I'm still like at beginner level. It feels like I'm at beginner level, but it's not very tiring anymore, and it's actually becoming more fun. But it's it went pretty slowly. It crept up to me, but nowadays I have less development time and more management time. And the interesting thing is that with development time, the feedback loop is very low. So as soon as you make a fix, you can immediately see that it works, or if you build something, you can immediately see the results from it. Yeah. If you make a team work more efficiently, then you probably only see the result within like after a month or 2 months, because then you can see, okay, this project went out much faster. This product was much faster built because of the more efficient way of managing. And that is something I still have to get used to. I like the fast feedback loop, which is something that you don't really get with management.
I was now thinking in parallel. You said you hired 7 people straight away, but was it already open source back then, right? It was already.
Yeah.
What's the proportion of? Because I looked at the GitHub, the contribution the amount of people who contribute is huge. Like I haven't seen much projects where you have that. Maybe, of course, they don't put it out, but that was a lot. So when you have so many people, like, it sounds like you don't even need, everybody contributes something, it grows further. Or what's the ratio maybe also between your employee input, your team's input, and the open source?
I think the ratio, that's interesting, because lately we've seen a lot more contributions from outside contributors, because we want to refactor some parts of the code, which is, you don't need to know much about the code base to do some parts refactoring. It's mostly single files that you refactor. So that's interesting. I'd say that now external contributors is 80%, and then, us is 80%. Okay. External contributors would be 20%. Mostly because it's refactoring, but sometimes you see this big contribution that's been done, that's something that I wanted to do for a long time. It would take like a full day, and then someone else has done it. So external contribution is really valuable. It's something that happens more than you expect, and that's the nice thing about open source. Alongside with that, you can hire from the external contributors. If someone has been contributing consistently and you like their work, then you can ask whether they want to do this full time. That's a really big advantage of being open source.
What's your vision generally in future on open source and your niche? What do you see in the future?
Yeah, I think that open source will become the default. It seems like, especially when you look at bigger companies as well, like Microsoft,
Exact.
yeah, they make things open source by default nowadays, and that's pretty interesting.
GitHub itself now bought by Microsoft.
Yeah, but GitHub is not open source. That is very interesting. It's the biggest open source platform, but they're not open source. That's pretty interesting. But you can see that developers tend to favor open source tooling. So if you're a developer,
Transparent.
right? So if you're a developer tool, then I think it's pretty hard to nowadays sell to developers when you're not open source. And there is this investor that we talked to, Open Source Capital, and they've shown us that the amount of open source companies that raise funding each year is growing a lot. I'm not sure what the exact numbers were, but it was like this curve. So big companies and small companies both increase in open source. I think it's also because of platforms like GitHub, where open source is becoming more mainstream, but also because developers now have a choice between open source and not open source solutions. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, can you elaborate on, what do you see? You've been 2 years or almost in university. What do you see like the real world in university? Like, what do you see future in that? Will the universities change? When you were studying, did you see a lot of practical stuff? Like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so University of Twente is pretty interesting because they've been very focused on the practical part of the studies, which I found the most interesting part of the university, together with the entrepreneurship at the university. But you can clearly see that University of Twente is also, for example, and any university in computer science is behind on concepts like your thought companies. Yeah, exactly. The concepts that you learn are 3 years old, 4 years old, which is a lifetime when it comes to open source, well, any technological space in the software development. So that is interesting. You also see that there are a lot more resources aside from university. So you can see there are so many self-taught developers nowadays because the resources are all free, available, and you don't really need a university if you have enough enthusiasm or discipline when you want to learn software development. However, university is still the very safe choice, and when it comes to things like non-software related things, like for example, if you want to get a visa to the United States, then it's still better to have a degree, and maybe in the future software developers are less wanted, and then you can fall back on your degree. So degree is definitely the safe choice, I'd say. And then some people just don't have the patience or don't have the will to, or they think they can go faster. I think that's the patience part. And then teaching yourself is very valid. I think it will happen more and more as these kind of stories of people who got successful without a degree come out.
When you were like in this, I guess, investor phase, there were many takeover bids, but you still...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's why I wanted to get the investment. Well, not the reason, but that's when we started thinking about it. At some point, CodeSandbox was very popular and we liked it. But then we got quite some acquisition offers from either competitors or companies in the same field, which were more aligned with our offering. And we almost wanted to take an investment. We were very close to saying yes.
You mean not investment, you mean to be taken over?
An acquisition, yeah. We were very close to going for an acquisition. We said yes, but then we said no. And when we said no, we said to ourselves, well, if we are going to continue with CodeSandbox, we should get an investment because this is the perfect time to get an investment for us after some releases. And we wanted to move faster, we wanted to grow. And the acquisition offers were kind of the kickstart of our decision to get an investment.
Because you saw that, oh, somebody needs what we are making, right?
Yeah.
Besides already having
right, and
the
the amount that they were offering kind of proved that the value of the company would be valuable.
Okay. What do you see the part of co-founder, boss, and maybe even just generally co-founders? Because, for example, Y Combinator mainly invests only in like at least 2 people companies.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your view on that?
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's easier to have a company with 2 people because you can share the emotional burden. Because it's a roller coaster. Sometimes you have very good news. Sometimes you think that this is the last day, the last week that the company will be standing because of some other external parts or something. And being able to talk with someone who's in the same position so that you can share the emotional load, that is super valuable. I think it decreases burnout. You can look after each other. You are less alone. So I'd say that co-founding a company is often the safer bet than only by yourself. Of course, there are people who'd like to work alone, and that makes a lot of sense. And for them, it might be better to do a sole founder. But I think for most of the cases, it's better to co-found the company.
When you were going like from the very start, probably you were kind of estimating where you're gonna be in some, just like heuristically in a few years. What was like your expectations and what was the reality?
The expectations were lower. I was very enthusiastic. I think the goal was for me in February, I think, I set the goal to have 500 Twitter followers and a project with 100 open source stars. So there was not even a mention of a web service or something. But then we released CodeSandbox in April, and I think a year after, well, in February, I think I was on like 3,000 followers and it was 500 stars or something. Or, yeah, I think those were the numbers. I'm not even 100% sure. Well, that was around the days of CodeSandbox Live. So actually, it wasn't much more at that time. But it was far above my initial expectations. So now we've kind of readjusted our expectations to be more in line with a more ambitious approach and try to get those, to reach those.
Yeah, you kind of already had an investment of $1 million, but let's say if you would have an investment of 10 million, would you know what to do with it? Because why I'm asking this, I always remember there was this founder of Revolut.
Yeah.
And he had this quote, yeah, if I get like a tons of money, like it will not accelerate, people will. So if I don't have the people or maybe even vision, like, yeah, you can't do just with money. So what's your view on that? Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. We initially wanted to raise less than 2.4 million. Our thought was 1.5, but we got higher offers than 2.4 million as well.
Your story sounds so like positive in that sense, like that you got more than you expected, which is quite rare, I think.
Yeah, well, we thought we would be able to raise more than 1.5, but we didn't want to raise more than 1.5 initially because we were inexperienced founders and we thought that we were the bottleneck instead of the money. So even if we would get 1.5, even if we would get more than 1.5, if we would get 10, then we would only be able to spend like a smaller amount because we wouldn't be able to scale the team to 20 people within 2 months. That we didn't know what all the problems that would arise from it. So we wanted to take it slow. Even if we would get 10 million right now, then I wouldn't really be able to put it to good use yet because we want to, I don't want to grow the team right now because we're now kind of settling in with the team. We're learning each other's good points, bad points. And I think even if we would double the team, for example, to 20 people, then everyone would not work as effective as they'd like. Just because there is no process, there is no team that's worked specifically on this part. I'm still a bottleneck in a lot of cases. So next year we would want to raise something that's alongside those numbers, but right now we wouldn't be ready for it.
You mentioned the bottleneck because I think some people are really good at making startups, some are running it big. What's your vision in the future? You want to stay with CodeSandbox for like upcoming 5-10 years, or you go into one day I'm gonna create something again new because I like to creating it from zero?
Yeah, I do like creating from zero. I really like the initial idea concept and trying to build it and see how people respond to it. So I'm a big fan of that. I do plan on staying with CodeSandbox for a long time because it's a problem I'm really enthusiastic about, and I also often, when working initially on these small kind of projects, I wanted to have big scale problems. So I wanted to have this monitoring system, or I wanted to be able to do, for example, cohort grouping on people. And when you have a project that's not popular, then that wouldn't even be possible. So now I'm in a happy position because this is like a new field and I want to work on it for a while. I want to see how fast this can grow, how far we can go with this. And, but at the same time, at some point I want to start something new again.
Okay. And also coming back, when you mentioned Y Combinator, indeed, what they do, they help with a lot of like networking connections. What do people need to expect when they get investments from, not company like Y Combinator, but I guess a venture fund, right? Is there also sometimes some kind of support, or it's just pure money?
Yeah, there is support. So, for example, we have a call every week with the investor, and we talk about how it's going, what the problems are, where they can help. So that is valuable, but also very valuable is the angel investors. So other founders have invested in CodeSandbox, and they also have a company, so they have the same kind of problems that you have, and they've had it before because they're at the later stage, and they can give some really good advice. So you still get a lot of advice and you get a lot of advice and network from the investor and the angel investors. You still get it. I think the approach of Y Combinator is pretty interesting because they, for example, organize a dinner with other founders where you can do a lot of talking, and that is super valuable. So you get some things with Y Combinator that you won't get with VCs. But it feels for me like that we have enough knowledge and network and advice around us with the VC investment.
What about the location, like Netherlands? You got investments in US? Many companies move to US. What's your view on that?
Yeah, we won't move to the US for a while. We will move to the US when we want to scale our sales. So when we have sales team, when we want to convince companies to use CodeSandbox, then it's better to go to San Francisco because then you can just come by the office of the tech companies and talk with them. But right now, I wouldn't say that we would have to go to the United States. The cool thing is that work is becoming more and more remote. Almost everything you can now do from a distance. And that is pretty interesting because you can also see that the investors, the American investors, are starting to invest in Europe, companies from Europe, companies from Asia, and they wouldn't do that before. They wanted to invest in the companies that they would be able to physically meet.
Why do you think that's happening?
Because all the tooling has collaboration, online collaboration, more and more well integrated. So for example, Slack is something that's really nice at asynchronous remote collaboration, and you have tools like Google Docs where you can easily talk with people. Now there is Zoom, which makes video conferencing better than any other tool that did it before. And you can see that everyone is working well from a distance. For example, we have a meeting with the investor, but it's a video call, and that works really well. We do go to the United States like 4 times a year to just meet up with them. But it's not a requirement to go to the United States anymore just to build a company. Also, the people that work for CodeSandbox, more than half is working from remote.
Okay, at the moment.
Yeah. So so we have people from Berlin, from Norway, from Romania, from United Kingdom, from San Jose even.
Why would you hire somebody from Norway?
He's very smart.
Okay, so it's like it overweights the price of cheaper countries so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
The talent pool that you have suddenly is like huge. And the person we have hired from Norway, he already worked on CodeSandbox for quite a while, even before we were a company. And he is so incredibly smart. Super nice that he wanted to work for CodeSandbox full time.
Yeah, Norway. That's really interesting that Norway, because in my head, like I would go straight away to hire some like much cheaper country but it's also generally developers. It's an interesting field where junior developer will, like let's say in US, I don't know, 60K, but then like the best top notch will be 180, for example. But the difference between them, what they bring, is much higher. The top notch, much higher. Yeah. So this general like. How it works is very interesting. So.
Yeah, the role difference is pretty interesting with junior and senior developers because junior developers can be super valuable. Same for senior developers, but generally when you have a junior developer, they need a senior developer to guide them. So while junior developers can be they can be super valuable, and any company would probably need junior developers just to have like a fresh mind on the problem. A lot of enthusiasm. We've decided not to hire junior developers yet because we can't give enough guidance to them yet. So we've mostly focused on experienced developers who know their stuff and they can work standalone. They can work independently.
What was the hardest moment?
The hardest moment. Yeah, so at one point, there was CodeSandbox was already a couple months old. I think it was 4 months old, and at some point there was this other tool that was released, and they were very much alike CodeSandbox. Like you would have problems seeing the difference between the two tools. While this other tool, they had a bigger backing. They had like more followers, and they've reached a new kind of group of people which were super enthusiastic as well. So I thought, okay, well this is it because they have the same offering. They have more followers. So CodeSandbox is kind of done.
How early was it? 2017, and
yeah,
this happened?
2017. I think it was around August, September.
Okay.
And I was kind of already done. I was kind of broken, but then I got motivated to make CodeSandbox better and try to improve over their offering, and then I started working on it more. But it was kind of because I had a lot of. At that time, I had attached my self-worth quite a bit to CodeSandbox because before that I didn't have that many followers, and suddenly lots of people were enthusiastic about both me and CodeSandbox, and so I did 1 + 1, and I'd say, okay, well, my self-worth is in CodeSandbox because that's how I became more popular in the developer community. And then there was this new thing that would be able to replace it, and then that was kind of like an emotional burden, I'd say. So that was the hardest time, I think, emotionally.
But it sounds like this ego investment kind of helped in this case.
Yeah, it's
because people often say ego is bad, but not always.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you get very attached to your product and your life is an emotional roller coaster, it gets crazy. But you do make sure that you deliver the best work. So the question is whether you want to be in this emotionally unstable state, because that's how it goes with companies. You have good times, you have bad times. So yeah, that's the balance you have to make.
Where is that company now? The one which...
It exists. Yeah, they have. So we've kind of gone to our own different niches. So it still exists, but I don't see much from them lately. I've been mostly not focusing on it. I've kind of been trying to avoid it. I don't like seeing news from them.